See, in sound effects, there are actually three categories. There is the atmospheric sound, there is incidental sounds, and there is Foley. What is atmospheric sounds? Atmospheric sounds is, suppose I'm sitting and in my room and there is a constant rain happening outside. There is rainfall, there is thunder, so and it's raining very heavily. So this is an atmospheric sound. This atmospheric sound is constantly going on. Sometimes the rain gets a little thinner. Sometimes it starts raining very heavily. Sometimes there is thunder. Sometimes there's lightning. So there is constantly some kind of a this immediate atmospheric effect, atmospheric sound that is continuously on. So it could also be if I'm next to the sea. Constantly there is a sound of the sea, sometimes seagulls, sometimes a ship horn. So these are atmospheric sounds. If I'm in a railway station, then we all know what a railway station sounds like. I mean, there are trains coming in, there are horns of the trains, there are sounds of the trains on the track, the diesel engine, the electric engine, the hawkers, the crowds, the coolies, the sounds of all the footsteps, people running, screaming, announcements. So there are all these sort of things that are happening inside a railway station. These are called atmospheric sounds. But there are certain sounds which are incidental sounds. Like suppose I start the car, the starting of the car. Then I get off the car, then shutting the car door or opening the car bonnet. These are incidental sounds. Like suppose I'm hitting or punching somebody, then that is an incidental sound. Suppose there's a calling bell. Now that is an incidental sound. So these are sounds which are happening like in between dialogues. If I'm talking to somebody and suddenly the bell rings, I turn around. So that's an off-screen sound, but it is an incidental sound. What is Foley? Now, as opposed to these kind of off-screen sounds or certain immediate sounds like you're hearing the keys, you're hearing some sounds in the corridor, you're hearing some voices in the corridor. So these are incidental sounds, but Foley is artificially created sound effects. Now, what happens is if I'm recording a person walking in the jungle, now it is not always possible. If I'm recording his dialogue, it is not always possible to record his footsteps also. Though it will be picked up a little by the microphone, but it will not be as sharp enough. So we have to recreate things like footsteps. Now, what is the surface that he's walking on? If he's walking on gravel, if he's whether he's walking on dry leaves, whether he's walking on a wooden floor or on a concrete floor or on a tarmac. So all these surfaces create a different kind of a sound. Or if you're walking on a carpet, it has a different kind of a sound. It also depends on what kind of shoes you're wearing. It could be boots, it could be leather shoes, it could be sneakers. So all these will have their typical sounds. So you have to understand what the character is wearing. If it is a female character wearing high heels, now that has a distinct kind of a sound. So you have to artificially create those particular sounds. So there are Foley artists who make these notes as what is the surface that person is walking on. Is that person walking in a corridor? Is that person walking in a marble kind of a corridor with a marble floor? Is it a wooden floor? So these are things that we have to keep in mind while recording. So these are artificially recorded. Even the sounds of movement, like there's rustling, when you're wearing a coat or when you're pulling up the zip. So these are sounds that are emitted. Often what happens is that this also creates a particular drama. Now suppose you want to show that this person is getting ready for an event. Like suppose he's going for war and he's dressing up in a soldier's uniform. So there will be a dramatic effect when he puts on his helmet, when he clicks his helmet, when he pulls the zip up, when you show the close-up of his boots, he's zipping his boots up. So, and he's wearing his jacket, he's putting his knife and his guns at the right places. So these are things that have to be done in the Foley. Suppose he's going to be going with a gun. Now, if the soldier is going to go fight with a gun, firing, or the gunshot is an incidental sound. Now we cannot record a gunshot in a studio because somebody is going to get injured. We are not allowed to use firearms. And it's very complicated, especially in India, to use firearms. You have to justify to the police why did you use, why did you have, what did you shoot with, and with this bullet. You have to justify to them. So it's not easy. First of all, it is very risky. Second of all, it's not possible to do that in a studio because it can create a lot of damage. So these are incidental sounds that we take from our library. So there are gunshot sounds which are using, but what is unique to that person's to the scene is how he's handling his gun, whether he's loading his gun and cocking his gun, or whether he's slinging the gun on the shoulder. This is called handling of that of the guns. Now, this handling, what we do is we get there are people who hire these properties or these guns. They make replicas of AK-47s. They make replicas of 9mm handguns, rifles. So there are various kind of replicas that are available, and they also make replicas of these bullets. Like suppose it's a 6-shooter, like a revolver with 6 bullets. Now you can click open that and you can put in those bullets over there and shut it. So you have to call this guy who hires these guns out for shootings and for recordings, and you have to call them in the studio, and like the soldier is doing, how he is loading his gun, how he is loading his magazine, how he is cocking it and keeping it ready for a shoot. So these handlings are recorded in the Foley. Then, of course, footsteps, the handling. Then, if somebody is sweeping, then these kind of activities. If somebody is pouring some tea or coffee and stirring the tea or coffee. So these are Foley sounds that are artificially created. So the Foley artist looks at the visual on the screen and replicates these actions. One very interesting thing was, say, in Bajirao, what we had done was, when Bajirao walks with this full armor, it seems like, he is walking with a very heavy metallic armor. So we have to recreate that sound. In reality, that armor was acrylic or plastic. So it did not have any sounds, let alone metallic sounds. So what we did is, to give it a metallic sound, we artificially, we took a bag of nails, kila, and we shook it every time the character fought or the character was walking. So the sounds of the netted armor was actually the sound of the bag of nails, which we were shaking every time the character walked. So this gave a certain texture to it. For me, it is very important. These are things that define that character, like I told you about Bajirao's footsteps earlier. So these are things that give the character a personality. So one of the questions was how important Foley is. For me, it is very important. It is extremely important that it enhances that particular drama. Like, when somebody is creeping up behind, suppose the soldier is creeping up behind the terrorist, like in Uri. So the little movements, the creak of the twigs and the dry leaves, and their soft footsteps approaching the camp very gradually. So these are things that, these become really loud, and these enhance that particular tension of that, the tension of that particular moment. Because you are suddenly thinking that, I hope he does not make too much of noise, otherwise they will be discovered. So these are things that you have to intelligently play along with. One of the questions was, how much of library sounds do I use and how much of recorded sounds do I use? For me, my library is a combination of effects that are readily available in, there are various kind of series of effects which I download, I buy. And these can be sounds like choppers, different kind of aircrafts, different kind of atmospheres. So these are things, why we depend on the library so much is there are a lot of things that we cannot go out and record. Like I was telling you earlier, it's not possible to go and record a gunshot. It's not very easy. If I want an AK-47 gunshot, or if I want a Mauser kind of a gunshot, if I want a Colt kind of a gun, then these are things which are not going to be readily available to me. I have to have very special contacts. I'll have to have very special permissions to go and actually record this, and which will be far more expensive for me than to just pull it out of the library. So there is a lot of dependency on the library sounds. Library sounds which I have downloaded and collected over the years, and also library sounds are libraries of record of effects that even I have personally recorded. There are effects I have recorded in cities like Kolkata, in cities like Hyderabad, in cities like Mumbai. I've recorded all these effects, and whenever there's a scene of that particular city, then I can use these particular sounds. Now, there was another question: do I use the same kind of sample in every film? Well, yes and no. Yes, because the principal sample is probably that, but the treatment will depend on the situation in that particular film. So, for example, if I'm using a gun, now it is not just the sound of that gunshot, but there are various layers of other kind of guns and explosions which I'm putting in that one particular gunshot to make it impactful. Because in reality, when you hear a handgun, it almost sounds like a firecracker. It does not have that glamour quotient, and it does not have that bigness that we are so wanting. When when the soldier is shooting the terrorist, it is not just the mechanical act of shooting a gun, but he's also shooting it. I'm also trying to add a certain vengeance to this whole thing, that I want to kill that enemy. I want to kill that terrorist. And if I add a lot of power in terms of low frequencies, in terms of explosions, in terms of two or three other kinds of combination of shots, and pack it into one gunshot, then it will sound like resounding effect, almost like, it'll be like a massive explosion and a massive drama that is being created when I'm shooting the terrorist over there. So it all depends on how you layer the sounds. Now, it can be this gunshot, and later on in the film, this same gun can be shot is probably in a different perspective. Now, the treatment of that essential, the main sample is going to be slightly different in that particular thing, in the same film in a different sequence, let alone other films. So even when you're using the library, you're not just picking up the sound from the library and pasting it on your timeline. You are doing a lot of processing on that. Now, in one of the questions was about frequencies and layering. Frequencies and layering this is one example I gave of a gunshot. Now, another example I'll give you, say, if you're coming next to a waterfalls, next to if you're on a hillside and there's a waterfall, there's a huge waterfall happening. It's not just a gush of water that you're hearing, like a shh kind of a sound. It has to have textures. There has to be liquid, there has to be water falling onto the rocks, the splash on the rocks, the trickle of the water, the droplets. So all these are layers that you have to enhance in that particular sound. Then you will get a richness, you'll get a texture. Otherwise, it will sound like a flat tape hiss kind of a noise. So what happens is, there are frequencies, like there are droplets. Droplets are little sprays of water. Then there are water trickling down. Apart from the main waterfalls, there is also a small tributary of water which is like trickling down on the side. So that also has a liquid kind of a texture. So these are things when there's a sea wave coming in. So it is not just a shh kind of a wave coming in. It is that wave, the roar of the sea, and the splash on the rocks or on the sand, and the froth when the wave is recoiling. Then the sound of the froth or the sand absorbing the water is also giving it a certain kind of a texture. Now, these things define movement. And it is very important that when you're doing sound design, when you're layering these kind of tracks, this is where frequency comes in. You might want to enhance the highs of the water a little to give it a little brilliance. You might want to increase the low frequency of the roar of the falls because it is a huge rumble, a water body. So we are constantly playing with these kind of frequencies to bring in those kind of dynamics. I must also tell you about some of you asked me about the sounds that I've used in Uri. Are they recorded or not? In extension to what I had said earlier, the choppers that were used in Uri were not real choppers. They were created in graphics. They were CGs, computer graphics. So obviously, when you are having this graphics of the choppers flying around and moving around, they're artificially created on the computer. Now, where do you record the sound? Even if you could tell the director, boss, I needed to go and record the actual chopper sound, the guy would say, boss, there are no choppers. They're just animated effects. So I had to imagine the sounds of those particular choppers and use those particular sounds depending on what the blade rotation would sound like, what is the magnification of the chopper. If it is a rotation of the blade which is more important than the shoop 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 of the blade is adding drama to it. Then if it is a chopper which is flying past it at high speed, then when they're opening fire from the turret of the gun turret of the chopper, then the sounds of those guns and the sound of the chopper. So it's a very complex sound design. So if you're asking me what takes so much of time, it is these things that take a lot of time in an action film. There's also a question that what is the most time consuming elements in design? These are most time consuming. What also was happening in Uri was there are various people, there are gunfights happening in the dark. Now, I have to wait for the graphics guy to give me those flashes of the bullet, of the gunfires, when the firefight is happening. I need those flashes to be able to give a sound, a bullet sound to every flash. It's not just the bullet sound, but the sound of the ricochet, the whizzing past of the bullet, the shells of the bullet dropping, the dust that is flying, the surfaces that it is hitting, like the metallic surface or the wooden surface. These enhance drama. This give it texture, and it makes you feel that you're actually sitting in the war zone. So this is how we work on effects. This is how we create a particular drama. This is how we create a particular scene. So it is not just a sample. It is, like I said earlier, it is treatment of that particular sample. So we are constantly. So it is a combination of your library sound, the sounds that I have recorded previously, which is also there in my library, sounds which are recorded on location. There are some very interesting sounds like vehicle sounds. There are some atmospheric sounds which are also used on location, recorded on location, which also I use. So it is a combination of all that. There are no straight things. Okay, only library effects. Only you can even make out that the person has been using from this and this library. If and you wonder why has he not really worked on it? Because by now I almost know every sound in every library. That okay, this particular sound has been used from that particular library. That should not happen. I should not know where the sound came from. And as a professional, if you're a professional, you will also in course of time understand that, okay, this is the sound that has been taken from that kind of a library. No, it should not distract you from the drama on screen.